Hey guys, and welcome to this week. We are going to be talking about Module 2, Seminar 6, and this is actually one of my more favored units in the sociology class. All right, and ideally, what we're going to be talking about is the concept of self. Okay, so when we talk about from a sociological perspective. As we know, sociology is the study of human interaction, and it's the study of how also we view ourselves in this scheme of greater things. And the first thing that I want to talk about is Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development. Right? Now, that sounds like it's a little fancy thing, but it's basically trying to understand how and why people do the things that they do when we look at it from a moral standpoint. When we talk about morality, we're talking about what we see as being right and wrong. And obviously that concept of right and wrong changes with every culture, and it changes within groups within larger cultures. So there might be a group where something is common day, everyday practice, whereas in a different society it would be completely different. For example, I grew up in Altoona, Pennsylvania, which is a relatively small city in a rural state. There were certain things that weren't done, obviously, like when we talk about in high school, there were drugs that were illegal, like marijuana, et cetera, et cetera. Shortly after high school, I moved out to California, and I remember walking into a family home with kids and a parent, and it was a beautiful home, and, there was a gigantic smoking apparatus right in the middle of the house, and the whole family gathered around it and smoked marijuana together. So, what I grew up is, and my parents were relatively, conservative. That would never happen in my household, but that was perfectly normal in this certain community in California. So, what someone might think is morally repugnant is commonplace elsewhere. So, just to kind of give you a heads up is what Kohlberg said is that we develop this from the people around us since the day we're born, right? And the very first one that we talk about is what they call infancy, and this is when they're very young children. In this case, we do things, and kids do things to avoid punishment, all right? As the kids get older, their interests shift to rewards rather than punishment. So, if we had a school-age kid, I could put a cookie on the counter and say, don't touch it. That kid in his mind is going to say, you know what, I want this cookie, and I'll take the punishment, right? So this is kind of where they start pushing those boundaries, and this is where schools use timeouts or what have you. Now the next one we talk about school age is really we're talking about preteens, and this is conformity and interpersonal accord. In other words, this is really when kids start to react and we say, you're a good boy, and efforts made to secure approval of others. So, kids stay after class, they clean the chalkboard for their teachers, et cetera, et cetera. And then we get into what we call authority and social order, and this is basically the orientation towards fixed rules. So the purpose of this morality is maintaining that social order. And I obviously don't need to tell you how important school is. That I don't know if you've ever felt issues with authority in school. There's teachers, there's principals that just seem like they're on power trips and they're out to get people. So this is that age where people start to push that authority and test it. And as you can probably tell from usually from 9th, 10th, 11th grade. And this is also, right to go beyond that. We get into the social contracts with teens, and this is basically where we talk about mutual benefits or reciprocity. And reciprocity is a word of giving back. And in this case, morally right and legally right are not always the same. And that could be referred back to the marijuana case. Whether or not smoking pot is morally objectionable or morally wrong. We know that right now it's illegal, but people start to wonder this. Another common example of whether or not something is morally, is retail theft. I remember I had a friend in high school who was a thief. I mean, he was a kleptomaniac. He used to steal everything. But he would never steal from small mom and pop stores. He would only steal from big stores. And I remember, talking to him, and he was like, "Well, it's just wrong to steal from the little guy. I'll steal from the big." So, both of those are still legally wrong, and both of them are actually still what I would consider to be morally wrong. Whether or not, it doesn't matter who you're stealing from. Theft is theft. But in his mind, he had that broken down. Right, and then we get what we call adulthood, right? And those are universal principles, and morality is entirely based on principles that transcend mutual benefits. So we no longer do what's right and wrong because it benefits us, but we do it because it's simply the right thing to do. So that was Kohlberg, and again, you'll see him in the video, and you'll be able to read about him. And the other one that I want to talk about was George Mead. And George Mead basically has what he calls the theory of self. And his basic summation is how we see ourselves is how we think others see us. So when we look in the mirror every day, what we want to see and what we see is what we think others see us as. And certainly and he broke down the difference between the I versus me. So the me in this case are the expectations and the attitudes of others. So, I mean, there's a reason why every single 6th grade kid wants they have to have the brand name shoes or the Under Armour shirt or whatever the present trend is or fad is, because they want to project themselves as being something. They want to be able to see themselves as they think others see us, right? And the last thing we're going to talk about when we come to this is basic socialization. And there's a big section in here about nature versus nurture. And this is a conversation that you are going to have for the rest of your lives. Do we do things because it's part of our genetics, or we do it because it's a social choice? So some things are obviously part of socialization. And there's topics that come up in the news every single day. Like, I know we just, several years ago, Pennsylvania looked at the Equal Amendments Act and allowed same-sex marriage. And there were a lot of proponents that were against that, saying that, it shouldn't be that way. And that's one such topic that constantly is brought up between nature versus nurture. Criminology is also another one. There are criminal theorists that believe that people are born criminals. There's also, and those are kind of antiquated. I mean, they're rather old theories from Cesar Lombardo and some of the people at the early turn of the century. And I think since then we've found that most research indicates that criminality is something that is not necessarily you're born with, but it's a learned behavior. And there is a really neat conversation in here about nature versus nurture. And what I want you to think about is why are twin studies important when we study about the effects of genetics and also the socialization of children. So I hope you guys enjoy this unit. This is absolutely one of my favorite units. So this is the very last one that we're doing in section 6 or module 2. From here on out, we're going to be moving into module 3 and be taking the exam. So you guys have about 5 weeks left. I look forward to reading what you guys are posting and watching your presentation. So, all right, thanks.